Welcome back to the second presentation of watercraft decontamination. This next section is going to be on safety and daily operations. As we prepare to jump into the field for the start of our season, safety is our number one concern and priority. With over 100,000 boat inspections occurring every summer, that represents ample opportunities for something to go wrong. We want to ensure that those situations don't arise. As part of the PPE that we require and provide for you, we will be having hard hats, high visibility safety vests for roadside locations, eye protection, hearing protection, gloves, as well as we also require you to be wearing closed-toed shoes for your safety. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, understanding the site map and how traffic flows through your launch is essential in being able to stay safe on the job. Being able to predict where boats are going to be entering, how they're going to be pulling boats out of the water, where they're going to be staging with their equipment is all essential in being able to predict what may or may not be happening around you. When performing a watercraft inspection, in the ideal scenario, the boater will accompany you in the inspection. You can then convey to them what you're doing, how you're doing it, and basically give them instructions for how they can inspect their watercraft if there weren't a steward on duty. So that isn't always the case. The boater won't always be standing there with you or willing to listen to you. More often than not, they'll be preparing their boat or equipment for launch or transport. So whether they are not paying attention and working on their own equipment, or they are following you around aiding in the inspection, it's important to always maintain a form of communication with them as well as a line of sight. Obviously that vessel and vehicle, whatever the tow vehicle is, when it came in, it was moving at some point. So there's multiple people coming around, there's the vessel that's in park, the boat may not be fully or properly tied down. There's a lot of moving parts to that equation and a lot of things that can go wrong. So being able to see where the boater is, be talking to them. The boater won't always be aware of where you are. So if they were to get into their vehicle and pull forward or back up, you need to make sure that they know where you are and you know where they are. It's important to always be aware of your surroundings when you're performing a watercraft decontamination or an inspection. Where's the boater at? Is the vehicle moving? Or is there another vehicle and trailer coming into the launch at that time? There's always going to be multiple moving parts to every launch at a given time. When you're in hazardous locations, that's also a time to have heightened awareness. Places like the transom or the rear of the vessel, the boater might not be able to see you back there if you're checking places like the transducer or the bilge plug or the propeller. If you're bent down looking at those locations, the driver can't always see you. Like the previous slide, that's why you always need to be able to maintain communication and visual eye contact if possible. So while you're performing that inspection, if the vehicle or trailer were to suddenly move, do you have an escape route? Always be prepared like that. Have an idea of where you need to go and your safe routes. When used properly, the pressure washers within our program are very safe and easy to use. However, there are threats that we need to be aware of. For one, we'll be using water going up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as the unit is capable of producing even hotter temperatures than that and steam. We are also dealing with pressurized water up to 3,000 psi. It's a variable pressure control, so it could go anywhere from that low pressure setting, just low flow like a garden hose, all the way up to that 3,000 psi, which is capable of peeling off vinyl decals, peeling off skin, and damaging personal property. The next aspect is projectiles from washing. So using that 3,000 psi when you are spraying against the boat, or if it hits the ground, the likelihood of something flying up is very high. Things like sticks, pieces of grass, or rocks. That is why safety glasses are always a must when using the pressure washers. In these two images, you can see where a pressure washer has caused damage to a person. In the left-hand image, that's an example of a particle that had flown up due to releasing high-pressured water. It's something that's very common, and that's why we require you to wear either safety glasses or a face shield to prevent situations like this. The image on the right, that's an example of a pressure washer that was directly in contact with someone's arm. Pressure 3000 psi has more than enough power to be able to peel back skin and cause serious damage. So now we're going to jump into what the start of your workday looks like and how to go about that safely. When you first arrive at your launch in the morning, the first thing you need to do is open up the doors to your shed. But before you enter, allow it to vent for 2 minutes. The reasoning for this is because both the pressure washer itself is in there, as well as 2 fuel tanks, one for gasoline and one for diesel or kerosene. So the fact that the doors have been closed with limited ventilation, there's the potential that fumes had filled up within the shed. So allow it 2 minutes with the doors open to properly vent before entering in the mornings. And then after entering the shed, after that 2-minute window has lapsed, the first steps are just going through your equipment and accessories to make sure that everything is still in functioning order and there's no concerns that may have come up during the night. So here's a list of things that you need to check for. Fluid leaks on the floor. This could be from fuel or oil from the pressure washer. Noticeably damaged equipment. There could be the potential for the outside or the inside of the shed to have had vandalism overnight, someone had gotten in or caused damage. You need to be able to identify that from the start in the morning. Fuel levels. Fuel levels are important. We want to make sure that you're operating always with at least a third tank to ensure that you're not going to run out during the day. We do have extra fuel tanks stored within the shed. However, those should only be used as your reserves. So make sure that you have those 1/3 tanks before the start of your day. If you don't, you need to notify your supervisor so that they can arrange to have those filled. Next is your oil level at the recommended mark. Once we have our in-person training, we're going to show you how to check for these things in person. However, so we want to make sure that there's proper oil level for both the pump and the motor. Without proper oil in these units, they will have a far shortened life expectancy. And then all PPE is in working order, not damaged. PPE doesn't help you if it's not performing the way it should. We need you to have hearing protection that's working, eyeglasses that are not broken or anything like that. So just make sure all of your PPE is in working order at the beginning of the day. So to go along with this, we have a shed start of the day checklist for you that will be in the shed. Make sure that you go through that checklist each day. It'll have things like this on it, as well as some additional key points to check on. So each day you're going to need to complete that checklist and make sure you initial it. Okay, so now that you've let your shed vent for 2 minutes, you've checked for proper fuel and oil, and you've checked for any signs of broken equipment or leaking fuels within your shed. Now it's time to get your site prepped for the day. So the first step is pulling your unit out of the shed. If it's the MHC, if it's the Ecos unit, make sure you just have both doors open. You'll be operating it from inside. And you will be starting up your pressure washer to allow it to warm up and prep all of your equipment. Part of your job each day is to make sure all of your equipment is warmed up and ready to go for the first boater. You don't want to wait for that first hour to go by, have your first boater show up and be like, oh yeah, I should probably get my stuff together. You never want to have a boater waiting on you. So always make sure at the start of your shift, prep all of your equipment, warm up the motor so that you're ready to go for the first boater of the day. So now you can begin the proper startup procedure for whichever your unit you're using, likely an MHC or an Ecos. So if it's an MHC, you need it outside of your shed. If it's the Ecos, it stays inside with both garage doors open. So make sure your water supply is hooked up if it's the MHC and that air is burped out of it. Utilizing the control panel, engage the choke by pulling out the throttle lever for it. It's just a simple pull-out tab. Make sure that the fuel is turned on, and all of these units are also set up with electric choke, so there is a key turn to start them. To ensure that the pressure washer isn't building too much pressure when you turn it over, the best way to achieve a proper start is to have the valve gun and the wand in your hand and have the trigger on the valve gun depressed, allowing water to be expelled out of it or air at that time while you're turning it over. It makes sure that there isn't too much pressure being built up, and it allows for an easier start, especially in the morning. Once the pressure unit fires up, allow it to run for anywhere from 10 seconds to 30 seconds with the choke on to allow it to start to get up to temperature and be running properly. Once it gets past that 10 to 30 seconds, you can re-push in the choke to take the choke off, and then allow it to run by itself without the choke on. At this time, you can now run water through the wand or valve gun and allow it to purge its system. There could have been sediment that built up in the lines or in the valve gun, so just purge water out of the system for anywhere from about 5 to 10 seconds to allow any built up sediment to clear through the lines. Next, you can turn on the igniter for the burner on the control panel. Depending on the model, there's either going to be a thermostat control knob that when you turn it to your desired setting, it'll automatically turn on the burner itself. Whereas some units you need to both turn on the burner separately as well as set the thermostat to the desired temperature. Once you've selected your desired temperature, use the thermal sensing tool, the laser temperature gun, to be able to measure the temperature of water coming out of the end of the pressure washer. To do this, it's preferred to have the low pressure hose attachment on the valve gun. Dispense water at the ground at low pressure and measure the temperature of the water from 1 foot away. Make sure that you are at your target temperature, whether it's either 120 degrees or 140 degrees, depending on the decontamination at hand. Once the desired temperature has been achieved, you can then disconnect the low pressure attachment hose if that is not what you need at that time, and you could attach things like the variable adjustment wand. After you're done using the pressure washer for that session, make sure you turn off the burner before turning off the pressure washer. Once the burner's off, allow cold water to run through the system for 1 to 2 minutes. So make sure you have preferably the low pressure hose connected to the valve gun. Depress the trigger and allow water to come out. And like I said, allow cold water to run through the hose for 1 to 2 minutes. This allows all those internal compartments to properly cool down before you shut it off. Okay, so now your day is underway. The first boat of the day, or maybe a boat in the middle of the day, is now shown up. So your pressure washer was already warmed up from the morning. You made sure of that. But now you need to restart the pressure washer to perform the decontamination at hand. So in most scenarios, you will not need to use the choke to restart your pressure washer, so long as you had run it in the last few hours. However, if you do have an issue with trying to start it, if it doesn't want to start, you can use the choke to attempt to make it run. After performing the decontamination, be aware that components will continue to get warm throughout the day. The more times you use the pressure washer, especially close back-to-back decontaminations, components will get hotter and hotter as you go. So it can be useful to extend the amount of cold water that you run through it, but just watch out for places that have metal connections, the burner on top of the pressure washer, the valve gun, the engine housing. There's a lot of places where heat can build up. So make sure you're not storing equipment on or around the pressure washer, as well as just be mindful of where you're placing your hands or leaning your body against. So now at the end of the day, when you're going to be putting away your equipment, you want to make sure both the engine is fully cooled down as well as all the water systems. So after you shut it down for the last time for the day, make sure you run ample cold water through it to cool the lines, cool the valve gun, and cool the burner itself. Next, you want to disconnect all the quick coupler fittings that connect the pressure washer to the hose, the valve gun, the wand. All of those features will start to get stuck over time and not want to connect or release. So it's important that each day, at the end of the day, you want to disconnect all of those parts from the pressure washer. Lastly, once you get all of your equipment put away, make a final visual inspection of everything. Make sure that the pressure washer isn't leaking anything on the floor. Does it smell strange? Are there any noticeable broken parts? Do you know that something was broken during the day? If anything like that happened or was found, contact your supervisor and notify them of that stuff. It's important. If there's anything wrong with the equipment, make sure to address that with your supervisor and don't operate the pressure washer until that's been done.